The greatest library ever built did not fall in a single night. It faded in smoke, in silence, and in the whispers of those who feared what it held. Imagine a place where every fragment of human thought, every story, every formula, every dream ever written, was gathered in one sanctuary. Scrolls from Greece, Egypt, Persia, and India rested side by side, guarded by minds that sought to understand the universe itself. And then, one day, it was gone. No one can say for certain how it ended. Some speak of flames that devoured thousands of scrolls in a single hour. Others believe it was strangled slowly by time, politics, and faith. But the truth, like the ashes that drifted into the sea, remains elusive. The Library of Alexandria was not just a building of marble and papyrus. It was the memory of the ancient world, a mirror of what humanity could have been. Its loss was not only the death of knowledge, but the dimming of human curiosity itself. This is the story of that light, how it was born, how it burned, and how it was lost to the darkness. In the heart of ancient Egypt, on the sunlit coast where the Mediterranean meets the Nile, stood a city unlike any other. Alexandria? A city born from the vision of a conqueror and shaped by the minds of dreamers. It was a crossroads of civilization, a place where languages, religions, and ideas met and fused into something new. But among its marble streets and towering columns, one creation would come to define it forever: the Great Library. The Library of Alexandria was not just a storehouse of books. It was a symbol of everything humanity could achieve when curiosity triumphed over fear. Founded during the reign of the Ptolemies, the successors of Alexander the Great, it was designed to collect every piece of written knowledge on earth. Ships arriving at Alexandria's bustling harbor were searched for manuscripts. Every scroll was copied, the original returned to its owner, and the copy preserved in the library's vast archives. The goal was simple yet monumental: to hold the entirety of human understanding within one place. Inside its walls, scholars from every corner of the known world gathered. Greeks, Egyptians, Persians, Jews, Indians, and Babylonians walked the same marble halls, shared meals, debated the stars, and questioned the nature of existence itself. It was here that mathematics, philosophy, astronomy, and medicine flourished side by side. Ideas that would echo through centuries were born in the quiet corners of this library. Some say it was a place where language itself evolved, where thought transcended borders, where knowledge was treated as sacred. But the same world that built it would one day destroy it. The library stood in a time of ambition and empire, of shifting faiths and ruthless politics. Power feared knowledge, and knowledge often defied power. Over the centuries, flames, war, and ideology would conspire to erase this monument to human thought. Some blamed Julius Caesar's fires, others the rise of new religions, others still the slow decay of neglect. Each version tells part of the truth, yet none tell the whole. Today, all that remains of the Library of Alexandria are fragments, quotes from lost texts, whispers in ancient records, and the haunting question that has survived for over 2,000 years. What really happened to the Library of Alexandria? Was it burned in one tragic night, or was it extinguished slowly, piece by piece, by the hands of those who claimed to protect civilization? This is not only a story of destruction. It is the story of what we lost when the light of human understanding was smothered, and of what that loss still means today. It is a story about our relationship with truth, power, and the fragile flame of curiosity that defines us all. Now, let us go back to the beginning, to the birth of a dream that would one day become the most legendary library in human history. The story begins in the 3rd century before the Common Era, in the young and glittering city of Alexandria. Founded by Alexander the Great, and carried forward by his successor, Ptolemy I, Alexandria was not merely a city of trade and conquest. It was designed to be the very heart of the civilized world, a beacon where the wisdom of all nations would converge. The Mediterranean shimmered beyond its marble ports, and ships from every corner of the ancient world arrived daily, carrying silks, spices, precious metals, and above all, knowledge. Ptolemy was more than a ruler. He was a visionary who understood that true power did not lie only in armies or wealth, but in ideas. He imagined a place where the entirety of human thought could be gathered, studied, and expanded. His dream was simple yet monumental: to create a sanctuary where the world's greatest scholars could live and learn together, free from the constraints of politics and borders. From that dream rose the Library of Alexandria, a creation unlike anything the world had ever seen. Its purpose was not to hoard knowledge, but to preserve and share it. Every ship entering the harbor was searched for written works, and each scroll was carefully copied. The originals were often kept, while replicas were returned to their owners. Within a few short years, the collection grew beyond measure, becoming a treasure chest of every human discovery and every imagined truth. The library was part of the grand complex known as the Mausoleum, the Temple of the Muses, the goddesses of inspiration. It was both a spiritual and intellectual haven, a place where art, science, and philosophy were seen as divine pursuits. Here, scholars lived, studied, and wrote in the same halls. They ate together, debated through the night, and dedicated their lives to the pursuit of understanding the universe. The library's walls were lined with scrolls, its courtyards filled with the murmur of conversation, and its air thick with the scent of ink and papyrus. It was a golden age of curiosity. For the first time, the knowledge of Greece mingled with the wisdom of Egypt, the astronomy of Babylon, and the philosophy of India. The boundaries between cultures blurred, and what emerged was not the triumph of one civilization over another, but the creation of something entirely new, a shared human intellect. Alexandria became known as the mind of the world. It was said that within its walls, one could hear the language of the stars and the rhythm of the earth. This was the birthplace of geometry, of early medicine, of the study of the heavens. It was a place where the questions of life, death, and creation were not feared but embraced. The Library of Alexandria stood as a symbol of what humanity could become when curiosity triumphed over ignorance, when unity triumphed over division. In that shining moment, the world believed that knowledge could last forever. But as history would later prove, nothing, not even wisdom itself, is safe from the forces of time, ambition, and fear. Within the towering halls of the Library of Alexandria, humanity's collective knowledge was gathered in silence and reverence. It was not a place of dust and decay, but of life. The scholars who walked its corridors were explorers of thought, adventurers of the unseen world. In the soft light that filtered through its marble colonnades, they unraveled the secrets of mathematics, philosophy, astronomy, and medicine. Each scroll was a doorway into another civilization, another time, another understanding of existence. The library's collection was staggering. Estimates speak of hundreds of thousands of scrolls, perhaps even 500,000, carefully written on papyrus and stored in cedar-lined chambers. There were the lost plays of Sophocles and Aeschylus, the treatises of Aristotle, and the philosophical dialogues of Plato. There were texts from Egypt's priestly temples, ancient maps of Babylon, and fragments of Indian astronomy. The scholars of Alexandria did not merely study these works, they compared, translated, and built upon them, weaving together the fabric of global wisdom. It was here that the first steps toward understanding the cosmos were taken. Astronomers like Eratosthenes measured the circumference of the Earth with astonishing accuracy using nothing but shadows and logic. He also created one of the earliest maps of the known world, marking cities, rivers, and borders as no one had done before. Meanwhile, mathematicians refined geometry, algebra, and the principles that would one day lay the foundation for physics. The library was not only a place of science but of imagination. Poets, dramatists, and historians flourished here, guided by the belief that language itself could reveal truth. The scholars of Alexandria understood that knowledge was not limited to facts and numbers. It was also the stories, the myths, the art, and the dreams of humanity. Every idea, from the movements of the stars to the workings of the human soul, was worth preserving. Medicine too reached new heights within these walls. The anatomists of Alexandria studied the human body in detail, performing dissections and documenting the structures of organs and the flow of blood. Physicians began to separate superstition from science, learning to treat illness through observation and reason rather than ritual and fear. For a brief and brilliant moment, knowledge became the new faith. The atmosphere of the library was one of constant discovery. Imagine standing in a hall lined with endless shelves of scrolls, the sound of scholars murmuring in a dozen different languages, the scent of parchment and ink hanging in the air. Questions were asked not to confirm beliefs, but to challenge them. Ideas collided, sparked, and transformed. Every dawn brought a new revelation, every night a deeper understanding. The scholars believed that by collecting all human thought in one place, they could uncover the hidden order of the universe. They imagined that the divine could be found not in temples, but in knowledge itself. For a time, it seemed they were right. The library was humanity's greatest experiment, a living monument to curiosity, a mirror reflecting the boundless potential of the human mind. But even as it grew in glory, it also became a target. For what is gathered can be scattered. What is written can be erased. And what is known can be feared. Beyond the golden age of discovery, the winds of change were beginning to stir. Power was shifting, empires were rising and falling, and not everyone believed that knowledge should belong to all. The light of Alexandria was brilliant, but it flickered on the edge of shadow. Soon, that shadow would begin to fall. The golden peace of Alexandria could not last forever. The city that had once been a sanctuary of learning was now the jewel of an empire, and jewels have a way of attracting conflict. By the year 48 before the Common Era, the world outside its marble walls was shifting violently. Rome had become the dominant power of the Mediterranean, and within its borders ambition burned like a fever. Julius Caesar, a general turned dictator, arrived in Alexandria not as a scholar, but as a man at war. Egypt was in turmoil. Two siblings, Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII, were locked in a struggle for the throne. Caesar had come to settle the dispute, and in doing so, became entangled in the politics of the Ptolemies. Cleopatra, young and brilliant, saw in Caesar not only power, but opportunity. Together, they sought to restore order, but the city became a battlefield. Armies marched through the streets where philosophers once walked. The harbor that had once received ships full of wisdom now filled with warships and smoke. During the siege, Caesar's forces found themselves trapped near the harbor. To prevent the Egyptian fleet from advancing, he ordered the ships to be set ablaze. Flames spread quickly, leaping from vessel to vessel, their orange glow reflecting in the dark waters of the Mediterranean. But the fire did not stop there. The wind turned against him, driving the inferno toward the city itself. Warehouses filled with grain, oil, and papyrus ignited, sending a storm of sparks across the streets of Alexandria. Somewhere amid that chaos, the fire reached the storehouses that held scrolls belonging to the great library. Ancient historians like Plutarch and Dio Cassius later wrote that tens of thousands of scrolls were consumed by the flames. It was not the grand halls of the library itself, but the auxiliary buildings, the repositories of knowledge waiting to be catalogued, that burned. Yet for many it was enough. In a single night, centuries of human thought vanished into the smoke. Imagine the sight. Scholars and scribes rushing through corridors, clutching armfuls of papyrus, their faces lit by firelight. The air thick with the scent of burning ink. The sound of scrolls crackling as the flames devoured words that had survived millennia. The knowledge of Babylon, of Greece, of Egypt itself, turning to ash in moments. Caesar may not have intended to destroy the library, but intention could not undo the damage. When the flames died, the city was quiet. Smoke curled above the ruins, and the people of Alexandria stood in silence, staring at the blackened remnants of what had been. A part of their identity had been erased, and with it, a piece of humanity's memory. Yet, the story did not end there. The library was wounded, but not dead. Scholars still gathered, new scrolls were written, and the pursuit of knowledge continued. The flame that had destroyed also illuminated a deeper truth, that knowledge, once shared, could not be so easily silenced. Still, the fire of Caesar's siege was a warning. It showed how fragile civilization could be, how easily wisdom could be lost in the noise of war. And it marked the beginning of a slow, tragic unraveling that would span centuries. The Library of Alexandria had survived one disaster, but greater storms were yet to come. When the smoke of Caesar's siege finally lifted, Alexandria stood scarred but alive. The streets were rebuilt, the palaces restored, and the great harbor filled once again with the sound of trade and voices. But for the scholars who had once walked the halls of the great library, something was missing. The heart of their world had been damaged. Yet, rather than mourn, they began to rebuild. Out of the ashes rose a quiet determination to preserve what remained of human knowledge. The spirit of the library lived on in what became known as the Daughter Library. It was housed within the Serapeum, a magnificent temple dedicated to the god Serapis, a deity that symbolized the union of Greek and Egyptian belief. The Serapeum stood atop the Rhakotis hill, overlooking the city like a guardian. Within its sacred chambers, scrolls and codices were once again collected and copied. The scholars who had survived the fire gathered there, continuing the mission that had begun under Ptolemy's vision. The Daughter Library became more than a refuge for knowledge. It was a symbol of resilience. Every surviving scroll, every reconstructed text, represented defiance against time and tragedy. Scholars from across the Mediterranean came to the Serapeum to teach, study, and debate. The echoes of the original library still lingered in their work. The museum's legacy, though diminished, refused to die. In those years, Alexandria became a city of contrasts. Outside the Serapeum, Rome's influence grew stronger. Soldiers marched through streets once filled with philosophers. But inside the temple's marble halls, minds still reached for the stars. The Serapeum held astronomical devices, mathematical tables, and translations of lost works from the East. It was said that copies of Aristotle's lost writings were preserved there, along with texts that had no equivalent anywhere else in the world. The scholars of the Serapeum worked in secret at times, aware that the world around them was changing. Knowledge was no longer seen as the highest virtue but as a potential threat. Empires wanted obedience, not inquiry. Still, the flame of learning flickered stubbornly within those temple walls. There were whispers that the Daughter Library hid more than scrolls. Some believed that deep beneath the temple lay hidden archives, chambers carved into the earth, filled with texts that had escaped the flames. Whether these stories were truth or legend, no one can say. But the idea that the knowledge of Alexandria had survived, even in part, became a hope that endured through the centuries. For a time, the Serapeum thrived as the new home of the world's intellect. Students studied the heavens, doctors refined medicine, and philosophers wrote of logic, ethics, and the nature of existence. It was as if the city had learned to live with its loss, to rebuild from fragments. Alexandria, though wounded, still believed in the power of ideas. But the winds of faith and power were shifting again. Rome, once tolerant of many gods and philosophies, began to change. New beliefs were spreading, beliefs that would challenge the old ways, that would see temples like the Serapeum not as sanctuaries, but as relics of pagan error. The library's second life was fragile, and though the scholars did not yet know it, they were standing on the edge of another fire. The story of the Daughter Library was not one of rebirth, but of survival. It was a quiet resistance against forgetfulness. And though the scrolls within the Serapeum remained hidden from the eyes of conquerors for a time, history was moving toward a new age, one that would once again test the endurance of knowledge itself. By the 4th century of the Common Era, the world that had once nurtured the Library of Alexandria was no longer the same. The Roman Empire, once a mosaic of gods, philosophies, and cultures, had found a new faith rising from its provinces. Christianity, once persecuted in the shadows, had become the religion of emperors. The gods of Olympus fell silent, temples were abandoned, and statues of Zeus and Apollo stood broken beneath the open sky. What had once been the world's most tolerant and intellectually diverse civilization was transforming into one of uniform belief. For the followers of the old ways, this was not merely a change of faith, but a rewriting of reality itself. The Serapeum of Alexandria, where the Daughter Library lived, became one of the last sanctuaries of pagan wisdom. Inside its marble halls, scholars still read the writings of Plato and Aristotle, still studied the stars and the natural world. But outside its walls, suspicion was growing. To many of the newly devout, these philosophers were heretics, their works temptations from a forgotten world. The tension between belief and knowledge deepened with each generation. The empire's leaders began to see learning not as a sacred pursuit but as a rival to faith. The libraries of the Old World, once symbols of enlightenment, became symbols of defiance. And when defiance meets dogma, fire is never far behind. In the year 391, that fire came to Alexandria once more. The Roman Emperor Theodosius issued edicts that outlawed pagan worship. Temples were to be closed, idols destroyed, and ancient rituals forbidden. The Serapeum, the last standing temple of the old gods, was ordered to be torn down. What followed was not the measured hand of reform but the frenzy of a mob. Crowds flooded the streets, whipped into fury by preachers who declared that the destruction of the Serapeum was the will of heaven. Statues were smashed, altars overturned, and the walls of the temple were stormed. Inside, the defenders, a small group of pagan philosophers and priests, stood their ground, protecting what they could. The air was filled with the echo of their chants, their last prayers to gods already fading from the world's memory. When the doors fell, chaos erupted. The scrolls and instruments that had survived since the days of the Ptolemies were scattered and burned. The Serapeum, the heart of the daughter library, was reduced to rubble. What had once been a beacon of knowledge now lay in ruins, a casualty of faith's conquest over curiosity. It is said that some scrolls were smuggled out before the destruction, carried by scholars who fled the city. They disappeared into private collections, hidden monasteries, or foreign lands. But the truth is uncertain. What is certain is that with the fall of the Serapeum, a curtain descended over centuries of knowledge. Texts that had preserved the wisdom of Egypt, Greece, and Babylon were lost, perhaps forever. The destruction of the Serapeum was more than the loss of a building. It marked a turning point in the human story, a moment when the pursuit of truth gave way to the pursuit of control. The age of open inquiry, when men and women could question the nature of the universe without fear, was drawing to a close. Yet even in the silence that followed, there remained those who would not forget. The torch of knowledge, though dimmed, was carried forward by a few brave souls who refused to let the light die. Among them was a woman whose brilliance and courage would make her both the symbol of Alexandria's final glory and the witness to its fall. In the years after the destruction of the Serapeum, Alexandria became a city haunted by memories. The streets that once echoed with the voices of philosophers now rang with the chants of preachers. The temples of the old gods were silent, yet one flame of the ancient world still flickered amid the gathering darkness. Her name was Hypatia. Born around the year 355 in Alexandria, Hypatia was the daughter of Theon, a mathematician and philosopher who had once taught within the shadow of the great library. From a young age, she was immersed in the remnants of that world, studying geometry, astronomy, and the works of Plato and Aristotle. Her father raised her not as a daughter of an empire, but as a daughter of reason, training her to seek truth above all else. By the time she reached adulthood, she had become one of the greatest minds of her age. Hypatia was more than a scholar. She was a teacher, a philosopher, and a symbol of what Alexandria once represented. In a city divided by religion and politics, her home became a sanctuary for learning. Students from across the Mediterranean came to study under her guidance. She taught the principles of mathematics and astronomy, but also the art of logic, the discipline of questioning, and the courage to think freely. Her lectures were said to captivate even the most skeptical minds. She would stand before her students, dressed in the flowing robes of a philosopher, speaking with clarity and calm. She believed that knowledge was not something to be possessed, but to be shared, that wisdom belonged to no nation or faith. Her words carried the spirit of the ancient library, the belief that reason was the highest form of devotion. But the world around her was no longer built for such ideas. Alexandria was now torn between two powers, the remnants of the old pagan traditions and the rising strength of Christianity. The streets were filled with tension. Political leaders vied for control of the city, using religion as their weapon. Hypatia, who refused to take sides, found herself standing in the crossfire. To the common people, she became a figure of myth and misunderstanding. Some admired her as a beacon of wisdom. Others accused her of sorcery, claiming that her knowledge of the stars was unnatural, even dangerous. In an age when faith was absolute, reason had become a threat. Among her students was Orestes, the Roman governor of Egypt, and among her critics was Cyril, the powerful patriarch of Alexandria. The two men were locked in a bitter struggle for control of the city, and Hypatia, though neutral, became the symbol of everything one side feared. Her influence over Orestes was seen as proof that she stood against the church. In whispers and sermons, her enemies painted her as the last defender of a dying pagan world. In the spring of 415, violence erupted. A mob of zealots, driven by rumor and hatred, seized Hypatia as she traveled home. They dragged her through the streets that had once celebrated her genius. The very city that had nurtured her mind turned upon her with blind rage. She was stripped, beaten, and killed within the walls of a church. Her body was burned, her ashes scattered to the winds. With her death, the final light of Alexandria's ancient wisdom was extinguished. There were no more teachers of her kind, no more gatherings of open thought. Hypatia's murder was not only the death of a woman, but the symbolic death of the classical world. The torch that had been passed from scholar to scholar since the time of Ptolemy fell to the ground, its flames smothered by ignorance and fear. Yet even in tragedy, her legacy endured. Hypatia became a martyr for reason, a figure whose story would echo across centuries. Philosophers, scientists, and dreamers would one day invoke her name as a reminder of what was lost and what must never be silenced again. In her courage, she embodied the spirit of the library itself, a spirit that refused to vanish, even when the walls around it turned to ash. For centuries, storytellers, historians, and poets have spoken of the burning of the Library of Alexandria as if it were one single moment, one night of tragedy when all the wisdom of the ancient world went up in flames. It is an image carved deep into our collective memory, the symbol of knowledge lost forever to human folly. But history, as always, is not so simple. The library did not die once. It died many times, each death a reflection of the forces that shaped civilization itself. The truth of its destruction lies not in one great fire, but in a slow unraveling that stretched across centuries. Caesar's flames may have been the first blow, scorching the scrolls in the harbor warehouses. The destruction of the Serapeum was another, a calculated strike against the remnants of pagan thought. Then came the death of Hypatia, the silencing of the last voice of free inquiry. By the time her ashes drifted through Alexandria's streets, the library was long gone, not just as a building, but as an idea. Each generation added its own story to the legend. Roman historians blamed Caesar's soldiers. Early Christian writers condemned pagan idolatry. Later scholars, centuries removed, imagined grand fires devouring hundreds of thousands of scrolls, their ashes darkening the sky. But few spoke of the quieter truth, that knowledge rarely dies in a single blaze. It fades, neglected, unguarded, forgotten. The real tragedy of Alexandria was not only the destruction of scrolls, but the loss of the will to preserve them. There is a haunting irony in this. For all the speculation about the library's end, no one knows exactly what was lost. The fragments that survived hint at wonders beyond imagination. Plays, treatises, maps, and medical texts that could have advanced humanity by centuries. Some believe that early theories of heliocentrism were written there, long before Copernicus. Others claim that the lost works of great mathematicians and physicians could have revolutionized science if they had survived. The library's death was not only a loss to its age, but to every age that followed. And yet myths have a strange power. Over time, the story of the burning of the library became more than a historical event. It became a parable. Each retelling served as a warning of what happens when ignorance triumphs over curiosity, when power fears knowledge, when humanity chooses comfort over truth. The image of the flames consuming the scrolls became the image of civilization turning against itself. Perhaps that is why the story endures. The Library of Alexandria stands in our imagination not only as a place that was lost, but as a mirror held up to every generation. Whenever books are banned, when ideas are censored, when voices are silenced, the library burns again. Its many deaths remind us that the destruction of knowledge is never an accident. It is always a choice. In this way, the library's story continues to evolve. It is retold not just by historians, but by artists, filmmakers, and teachers. Each new telling reshapes the myth, transforming tragedy into lesson. The Library of Alexandria has become a symbol not of failure, but of possibility, a reminder that the pursuit of understanding is both fragile and eternal. As the centuries passed, its ruins faded beneath layers of new cities, new empires, and new religions. But its ghost remained. The dream that was born in those marble halls, the dream of gathering all knowledge in one place, never truly died. It would rise again in different lands, in different forms, each time humanity remembered what it had lost and dared to seek it once more. The ruins of Alexandria's library may have turned to dust, but its absence has echoed through the ages like a wound that never healed. What humanity lost there was not only parchment and ink, but the continuity of its own story. The library had been a bridge between worlds, a place where the wisdom of one civilization could ignite the imagination of another. When it was gone, that bridge collapsed, and humanity entered a long night of forgetting. Imagine what might have been if those scrolls had survived. If the medical treatises of Herophilus, who first described the human nervous system, had been preserved and expanded. If the mechanical designs of Hero of Alexandria, who created early steam-powered devices, had inspired inventors 1,000 years before the Industrial Revolution. If the astronomical theories from Babylon and Greece, already hinting that the Earth moved around the Sun, had guided our understanding of the universe long before Galileo. Without the library, countless discoveries had to be made again from the beginning. Centuries of progress were lost, as knowledge that could have propelled humanity forward lay buried beneath the ashes. Civilizations rose and fell while rediscovering truths already known to the scholars of Alexandria. The Renaissance, often seen as a rebirth of learning, might instead have been its continuation had the library's treasures survived. The world we know today, our science, our medicine, our technology, might have come 1,000 years sooner. But what humanity truly lost was not just information. It was a way of thinking. The library represented an idea greater than any of its scrolls, the belief that all knowledge was connected, that truth transcended borders and beliefs. Its scholars did not divide wisdom into science or philosophy, sacred or profane. They saw it as one vast continuum, a single pursuit of understanding. When the library fell, that unity of thought was fractured. Knowledge became compartmentalized, guarded by institutions and faiths, often hidden from those who needed it most. Still, the echo of Alexandria never faded completely. The dream it embodied resurfaced again and again, in Baghdad's House of Wisdom, in the great monasteries of medieval Europe, in the universities of the Renaissance. Each time humanity remembered, it built another library, another sanctuary for thought, as if trying to rebuild what had once been lost. Even today, every archive, every database, every search engine is an echo of that ancient dream, an attempt to recreate the library's impossible ambition to gather all that humanity knows. Yet the story also serves as a warning. The destruction of the library was not just an accident of history, but a reflection of a truth that still endures. Knowledge is fragile. It can be silenced, manipulated, or erased, not only by fire, but by neglect, by censorship, by apathy. Every generation must decide whether it will guard the flame of curiosity or let it fade into darkness. The Library of Alexandria was built on faith in human potential, and its fall was the result of human fear. That tension still defines us. We live in an age where information is limitless, yet understanding remains scarce. In the hum of our digital world, the spirit of Alexandria whispers a question that has never gone away. What will we do with all that we know? Will we protect it, nurture it, and share it freely, or will we, like those before us, let the light of knowledge be consumed once again by our own ignorance? As centuries passed, the fires of Alexandria dimmed into legend. The marble columns crumbled, the scrolls became dust, and the harbor that once shone with ships from every horizon grew quiet. Yet beneath the silence, something endured. The flame that had once burned in the library's halls did not die with the papyrus or the scholars. It found new vessels, new voices, and new homes. For knowledge, once kindled, has a way of surviving even the darkest nights. From the ruins of Alexandria rose the city of Baghdad, where the Abbasid caliphs built the House of Wisdom. There, scholars translated the surviving Greek and Egyptian works that had escaped the fires, preserving fragments of Alexandria's legacy. They added their own discoveries, their own brilliance, extending the reach of human thought. Algebra, astronomy, and medicine flourished once more. The light that had been extinguished on the Mediterranean shores had reappeared on the banks of the Tigris. And when Baghdad, too, fell to conquest and time, the flame passed on again. It traveled through Moorish Spain, through the monasteries of Ireland, through the scholars of the Renaissance who rediscovered the lost texts of antiquity and breathed new life into them. Each age believed it was rediscovering knowledge, but in truth, it was remembering. Every time humanity sought to understand itself and the universe, it was answering the call of Alexandria's ghost. The library's death became its immortality. In every age that followed, it inspired the creation of new centers of learning, from Oxford to Timbuktu, from the Library of Congress to the digital archives of the modern world. The dream of Alexandria lives wherever a human being opens a book, peers through a telescope, or asks a question no one has dared to ask before. The lesson of the library is not one of despair, but of resilience. For though the flames devoured the scrolls, they could not consume the idea behind them. The library was more than stone and parchment. It was the embodiment of human curiosity, the eternal hunger to know. That hunger cannot be destroyed. It is in our nature to rebuild, to seek again what was lost, to light the flame once more. So when we look upon the story of the Library of Alexandria, we are not only mourning a tragedy, we are witnessing a transformation. The fire that destroyed it became the fire that illuminates us still. Every scientist who questions, every philosopher who wonders, every child who dreams of what lies beyond the stars continues the legacy of those who once gathered in that ancient hall by the sea. The library's walls may have turned to ash, but its spirit burns within every act of learning, every spark of discovery, every word written in pursuit of truth. It is the eternal flame of human intellect, flickering across time, reminding us that knowledge cannot be conquered, and curiosity cannot be silenced. The story of the Library of Alexandria is not only about what was lost, but about what was born from its ashes. The Library of Alexandria no longer stands. Its stones are buried beneath centuries of earth, its scrolls scattered, its scholars long forgotten. Yet its essence still lingers, not in marble halls or ancient ruins, but in the way we think, question, and dream. The library was never only a building. It was a promise, a testament to humanity's belief that knowledge can bring us closer to truth, to one another, and to something greater than ourselves. Every time we preserve a story, share an idea, or teach a child to wonder, we keep that promise alive. The memory of the library lives in every classroom, every laboratory, every shelf filled with books, and every digital archive that spans the modern world. Each one is a continuation of Alexandria's dream, a new attempt to hold the light of human understanding in our hands. But the story of the library is also a warning. It reminds us that knowledge is fragile. It can be destroyed not only by fire, but by indifference, by fear, by the belief that some truths are too dangerous to know. The loss of Alexandria was not inevitable. It was the result of choices, made by people who valued power more than wisdom. And those choices are still ours to make. In the quiet that follows the story, imagine the sound of a single page turning, the faint whisper of ink across parchment. That is the echo of the library. It reminds us that even when the world forgets, knowledge waits to be rediscovered. The flames that once consumed the scrolls of Alexandria could not erase what they represented. They became a signal fire across time, guiding us toward the understanding that knowledge, like light, only truly dies when we stop seeking it. The Library of Alexandria is gone, but its spirit endures wherever human curiosity survives. It burns within every question, every invention, every truth spoken against silence. The flame that began there still glows within us. It asks us to remember, to learn, and above all, to never let it fade again.